One of the more common complaints I hear against Fire Emblem Fates Revelations is the idea that the cast is terribly balanced, and basically the only viable team is to use all 8 royals with no retainers. I've always found this argument to be a little bit silly, because every Fire Emblem has some number of super strong units that end up centralizing themselves in the meta, but Revelation, at the very least, has a ton of deployment slots, so you can afford to run Xander and Ryoma alongside whichever scrubs you would like. But if you only want to run the most busted units available, running all 8 royals is a surefire way to avoid doing that, because Elise, who is a royal in Fire Emblem Fates Revelation, is arguably one of the worst units in the game. But before we begin, this video is part of an ongoing series where I'm doing a deep dive into every unit in the Revelation cast. If you're interested in looking at some of the previous units I've covered, they are in a playlist linked below, and if you'd like to vote on who gets covered next, consider supporting me on Patreon, where $5 and above backers have the ability to vote on not only reviews, but other stuff affecting the channel. With that being said, let's dive into today's unit review. Elise joins you as a level 7 troubadour, and her stats are basically what you expect from that description. She has quite low HP and defensive stats, but her magic speed and resistance, alongside her luck, are quite serviceable, and she has phenomenal growths in those areas, with a 75% magic growth as a troubadour. This high magic growth is a result of the fact that her personal growth of 65% is tied with Orochi for the highest in the cast. So when coupled with her also good speed growth, Elise frequently doubles foes and hits on resistance for massive damage, with the only weak point in her build being a pretty abysmal skill stat. With a base of 7 and a 45% growth, it's going to be less than you would like. So even though tomes are a very accurate weapon type, Elise can often face hit issues, especially when using the higher rank tomes. You can get around this by just using fire or forging things up, and in fairness, Elise's phenomenal luck stat also helps with accuracy a bit, but you are going to have to put in a little elbow grease if you want to make Elise hit things. Of course, this is usually worth it for a trained Elise, because she hits like a glass cannon, and even amongst the bulky foes of Rev, there are few that will survive her onslaught. Of course, as a glass cannon, Elise isn't any good on enemy phase, and you need to ensure that she is attacking from a safe distance, but that's hardly a unique trait amongst the Revelation cast. And positioning your army safely outside of foes' ranges is something you're probably used to, so it shouldn't be that big of a problem for a trained Elise. With all this in mind, you might be wondering why I alluded to the youngest Norian being a pretty bad unit. And the reason for that is, while these are all traits that apply to a trained Elise, Elise doesn't start out trained. As I mentioned, she's a level 7 troubadour, and she joins you in chapter 14. By that point, the majority of your army will level in the double digits, and you have access to 2 powerful pre-promotes in the form of Camilla and Reina. So Elise is noticeably behind the curve. And this applies to both friend and foe, as about half of the enemies you face in Chapter 14 are promoted, and that number's only going to go up with Chapter 18 and onward featuring exclusively promoted foes. Of course, Elise isn't unique in being underleveled. There's a good number of training projects in Rev, and leveling them up is actually somewhat easier than in other Fire Emblem games, thanks to Fates' generous experience formula, wherein underleveled units gain significantly more XP, helping them to catch up quickly. So, Elise's retainers, Arthur and Effie, while not great themselves, are at the very least capable of snowballing if you go out of your way to feed them kills with effective weapons or dual strikes. Elise isn't so lucky, because, as I mentioned, she starts out as a troubadour, and troubadours are a staff class. At first, this may seem like something of an upside. After all, with staff experience, you don't need to go out of your way to set up kills. You just need an injured friend and Elise nearby. But while the Fates' combat experience formula is quite generous, the same cannot be said for the healing EXP formula. We don't actually know all of the specifics for how healing experience works, but what we do know is, in general, you get more EXP from healing higher level characters and less from healing lower level characters. But even with Elise benefiting from healing higher leveled friends, she's not going to get the amount of EXP she needs in order to crawl out of the level 7 hole as fast as you want. And this is in large part because there's just fewer opportunities for experience to a healer. Combat units can train up by fighting a large number of foes on enemy phase, or they can get an experience multiplier by killing high-level foes. But the only way that staffers can increase their experience gain is to use higher ranked stats. And that brings us to Elise's other weird problem. Her staff rank is surprisingly low. D staffs just isn't cutting it as we round the corner into the mid-game. It only allows Elise to use 6 non-My Castle staves: Heal, Mend, Bloom Festal, Sun Festal, Freeze, and Rescue. Of these, Freeze and Rescue are certainly the most useful, but they're also in fairly limited supply. And Rescue doesn't even depend on your user's magic stat, so you can just throw it on a Falco Knight and it's better utilized there than on Elise. The healing staves, meanwhile, do benefit from Elise's high magic, but Elise is far from the only character capable of healing your team, and there's diminishing returns with more and more staffers and fates. And Elise faces stiff competition for the staffer role. Sakura is, of course, one of the better units in the campaign, and she starts in a staff class, although it's possible you've reclassed her and lost staff access. No worries if you did though, because the map after Elise, Shura joins, and he is also a very strong pre-promote with a decent staff rank. In fact, his is better than Sakura's. If you went with a male Corrin, you also have access to Felicia, who in and of herself is a phenomenal unit and appreciates being in either Troubadour or Maid. But even if you went with a female Corrin, late join Felicia shows up at the end of chapter 15, and she too will have a better staff rank than Elise. And while early Jacob isn't necessarily suited for the staffing role, his son Dwyer certainly is. And to add insult to injury, if you recruit Dwyer in time for chapter 14, he not only is a higher level than Elise, but he also shows up with more staff EXP than her, since he is halfway to C rank. I wouldn't recommend an early recruit Dwyer as your primary staffer, but if you desperately need one, he is a feasible option that's arguably better than Elise. And the same is true for Azama, who joins in chapter 16 with C rank staffs, although his magic stat is certainly underwhelming, so whether or not he's better than Elise in the staffer role is up for debate. I honestly find it kind of baffling that Elise has such a low staff rank, and I think that it was a genuine programming mistake to give her D staffs, since the 2 villages she starts nearby each hand out a Wayne Festal and a Physic, which are C rank staves. It feels like these staves are meant to show the utility of Elise, since they both have relatively low base healing, but can be good in the hands of a high magic unit. However, since they both sit unusable in her inventory, instead they show off just how worthless she feels. And I'll rip the band-aid off here. Elise is going to end up in F tier. In fact, she's such an abysmal unit that it's made me reconsider late Jacob and bump him up from F to D tier. By the way, for anyone new to these videos, the Sage represents late join Jacob, and the pink-haired dancer represents late join Felicia. Ultimately, there just isn't any good reason to use Elise, especially with the low number of deployment slots in the 3 maps following her join. But this series is about more than just ranking the characters. Sure, Elise is an easy F-tier slam dunk, but the beauty of Fates' systems is even F-tier units have unique attributes you can take advantage of with enough game knowledge. So I want to take the rest of this video to highlight builds for Elise that are absolutely not worth the trouble, but can still be fun if you're in the mood for silly off-meta nonsense. The first high-investment build I want to go over is the one I used in my draft playthrough, a Rallybot Elise. Elise already naturally has access to 2 rallies, with resistance from Strategist and defense from Wyvern Lord. But she's one of the rare units that can gain access to a full 5 rallies with correct support routing. Her friendship with Sakura grants access to both Rally Luck and Rally Magic. And she can grab Rally Skill from either a Niles or Laszlo marriage, although personally I prefer Rally Strength from Arthur, both because I think it's a more impactful rally and because it's a fast support. This does unfortunately mean you have to use multiple bad units and support them with each other, but if you've already committed to the Elise build, you're probably down for it. That being said, earning a support between Sakura and Elise can be somewhat challenging, especially if you have both of them stay in staff-wielding classes. So personally, I prefer going for Azura Friendship, which grants access to rally speed. This does unfortunately mean you only get 4 out of 5 possible rallies, but you can also slot in an additional support skill in Amaterasu, which provides healing to nearby units and synergizes quite well with Elise's personal skill Lily's Poise. Lily's Poise gives adjacent allies +1 damage dealt and -3 damage taken. So if you have Elise rallying people anyway, you can potentially position her next to someone who's going to attack, rally, and bolster their offenses and defenses by a huge amount. But this build is incredibly investment heavy, not just in the number of seals you'll need to give Elise, but also in how much experience she needs to gain. To get your first rally, you need to reach promoted level 5. And in order to get any additional rallies, you need 3 more levels in a promoted class, with the exception of Luck, which just requires 1 level. Because of the way Fates' experience formula works, it's advisable for Elise to promote at level 10 in order to maximize the amount of EXP she gets going towards rallies. However, even getting to level 10 is going to be somewhat slow going if Elise is stuck on staff experience. It is a little bit tempting to take a page out of Conquest's book and immediately reclass Elise into Wyvern, since that allows her to at least do combat and gain experience via kills, but I think in Rev this is a lot worse. Wyvern Elise just barely has enough stats to keep up in Conquest's early game. However, Revelation enemies are much stronger, and Elise joins in the mid game. As such, her combat is truly abysmal, and it's honestly just probably better to bite the bullet and grind some staff experience before eventually using a Master Seal to turn Elise into a strategist. This also has the advantage of letting you get rally resistance first, so Elise doesn't have to use a Heart Seal to go back and get it later. On that topic, I think Falco Knight is probably Elise's best final class for this build, since it gives her flight and 8 range flexibility to help with rally positioning, but also retains staff access in case she has a turn where healing is more valuable than rallying. Of course, rally bots are a dime a dozen in Rev, so unless you're doing a draft playthrough or some other sort of cast restrictions, there's not really a good reason to choose Elise for that role. So instead, you might want to look at the options for best utilizing her amazing magic and speed growths. And the go-to mage class for Fates is Sorcerer, which Elise can unlock by marrying Odin. This can then be further supplemented with Sakura Friendship, which provides Tome Fair via Omnioji. Although, unfortunately, that's kind of all Elise has for the traditional Sorcerer build. Still, being able to take the high magic stat into Malik Knights on flyer heavy maps and Sorcerer on the indoor portions of the late game is a valuable attribute, and Elise has the easiest access to Malik Knight of all magical units. In fact, if you're planning on making Malignite into Elise's final combat class, then there's no need to waste your marriage on Odin, and you can instead spend that resource on another class to get another useful skill. Accuracy boosters like Lucky 7 from Niles or Certain Blow from Takumi immediately come to mind for me. Although, if you want an even more gimmicky option, Elise does have access to the Samurai line through Ryoma support, and therefore can attempt to become a Vantage Sweeper. I've gone over Vantage builds in a lot of previous reviews, so I'll try to be brief here, but the general idea is to stack Elise's attack high enough that she kills everything with Vantage before it can attack her. She has a super high magic growth, so getting to the cap is just a matter of grinding levels, and she can grab Tome Fair from Sakura support in order to boost her magical damage by 5. Her innate class of Malignite also gives a 5 damage buff in the form of Trample, which only is active against non-mounted units, but in the late game of Rev, that's the vast majority of foes. Round things out with Vantage in Life and Death, and you have a plus 20 damage stack on Elise. But unfortunately, even with that huge damage buff, this build has a few problems. Since she's spending her marriage to acquire the Samurai line, Elise is incapable of getting into Sorcerer. Therefore, she can't use the S-rank Tome Excalibur in any of her classes, and instead needs to rely on Forged Fire Tomes in order to have enough accuracy to reliably Vantage Sweep. And speaking of accuracy, without marriage access, Elise loses access to any of her accuracy boosting skills. In general, unless you spend an absurd amount of money on a high-leveled forge, Elise's accuracy isn't going to hit 100%, especially against dodgy foes. And if you miss an attack in a Vantage build, you're basically dead. So while this is impressive on paper, in practice, I find that this is one of the weaker ways to use Elise. And honestly, even if you go into Samurai and grab Life and Death, I wouldn't go for Vantage Sweeping. Instead, I would just use Elise as a glass cannon. Life and Death is all upside if you never get attacked after all. Okay, now we are really scraping the bottom of the barrel, but technically, Elise has access to Sky Knight through Azura and Archer through Takumi, which allows her to go into Kinshi and gain both the Sky Knight and Archer skills, which I guess could be useful if you want to run a magic bow build on Elise. Although, considering Elise doesn't have any native bow classes, grinding up her rank is going to be extremely painful. And that's before going into the fact that purchasing magic weapons in Rev is oftentimes a bigger strain on your economy than most teams can manage. Unless you allow for grinding, Rev has the tightest economy of any of the 3 Fates routes. And while there is a Levin Sword in Elise's join map, alongside a Bolt Axe and Bolt Naginata in Chapter 19, if you want to get a Shining Bow without paying a ton of gold, you're going to have to wait until Chapter 21. Or I guess you could do the Nina Paralog, but that involves shielding Niles, and I'd rather not. Although, on the topic of child paralogs, that is the other area in which Elise can be useful, as her incredibly lopsided growths are desirable for some of the magical children. Well, maybe that's a bit of an overstatement, because there's really only 2 children that specifically want Elise as a mother, and those are Ophelia and Nina. All of the other kids are either unable to have an Elise mom, or are physically focused and would rather get a parent that helps them in that department. There is potentially an argument for Elise Percy if you're going the Malignite route, since she helps to bolster his magic, and technically Dwyer starts in a magical class as well, although I think he usually prefers a physical mom, and instead the main reason you would have Elise marry Jacob is if you wanted to give the butler access to Wyvern. Still, the main takeaway is that Elise isn't actually all that beneficial to the majority of children. And the three she does help, Percy, Ophelia, and Nina, all belong to fathers that are also pretty suboptimal units, and deploying them alongside Elise can feel like a pretty big chore. And so her prospects as a mother are, in my opinion, just as bad as her prospects as a unit. Although from an ethical perspective, that's probably for the best. And that's really all I've got to say about Elise. I'm sorry, I know that people tend to dislike when these deep dives don't feature a ton of in-depth builds, but Elise doesn't have that much going for her, unfortunately. There's a few fun things you can do, but all of them come with the caveats that they require a ton of investment and can be done better and more easily by other characters. As it turns out, Elise is just a very inflexible unit, and this is due to a variety of factors. Magical characters are going to inherently be a lot less flexible than physical ones. In part, it's because magical characters are inherently a lot less flexible than physical ones due to the fact that far fewer classes utilize the magic stat. Making this problem worse, Elise misses out on the majority of Hoshidan magical classes since the royals all support each other, and therefore Elise couldn't support someone like Hayato or Rinka in order to gain access to those class lines. Worse still, Elise is limited on the Norian end of things. All three of her sibling supports with Camilla, Xander, and Leo do not grant her any new classes, as Camilla will give the Wyvern class, which is something Elise already has access to. And as if to rub salt in the wound, Elise wastes one of her 3 remaining friendships on the Armor Knight class line with Effie, which is not only just a generally pretty bad class, but is definitely not the role that Elise wants to jump into. It doesn't utilize her magic stat and relies on being a frontliner, something that, while funny, is absolutely counter to Elise's stat spread. Overall, as I mentioned earlier, Elise is an F tier unit, but I have her at the very top of F tier, as unlike the other scrubs, I think she has some real potential. As the only mage with innate Malik access, she does have that as a unique positive trait, and Lily's Poise is definitely a banger of a personal skill. I just wish it was on someone who isn't stuck spamming the heal command for 3 whole levels. But I'm curious, what do you think about Elise? Have you ever bothered using her in a rev run? And if so, what build did you do, and how did it turn out for you? Let me know down below in the comments. I'm eager to hear from y'all. And similarly, I'm eager to thank my patrons. So without further ado, thank you to Glupshido, Erica Ford, Pergnite, YLO1, George Grenville the 7th PM, Jamie Collins, Arvis, Crispy Matthews, Floahay, Amy Hazel, Hungry Heart, Hound Dogs, Burnt to Cinders, Lovis Roman, Shinthia, Faulty Videos, Kyle Madison, Derek Williams, Anna Cabana, The Daily Fugal, Faye, Magic Bite, Thoughtful Insanity, Robin Goodfeller, JT Spritter, Laura Hunter, Ziggy WSB, Psych, Chris, Root Beer Pants, Queen Elizam, Control Alt Aegis, Roman Kormancic, Nick Knack Hammer Smack, Carrier Has Left, Angel Not Caceres, Zanwiff, Not Gino, Flingon, Edward C, Cyrockin 2, Cabbage, Caius Cole, Bree, Punch Fighter Champion, Eggman, Maxine the Vampire Queen, Sardonic Muse, Wesley Toma, Name Number 5, Sensitive Luigi, Femtal Illness, Wannabe Cinnabon, Punk Tattoo Guy, Calamity Callie, Jackson McMahon, Saren Galaxy, Rezi, Dino Anna, The Owl, Andu, Rhea, Gameboo, Carosa, Fyrant, Your Doctor, Frozen Helm, Patwit, KH, Electric Giga, Girl Boss, Lizard Bongwater, Christopher Bueno, Marin McLean, Jaden, Dylan Solis, Some Trades, Sarah K, Guiji555, Smaz Ruby, Zycrom, Robin D, Alenby, They Thom, Clan Clan, Pillow Willow, Gabe the Green, and especially my Jagans, Him Rowan, Siggy, Alexander Roper, Autumn, and Dragonback Lancer. If you would like to join the names on this list, there is a link to my Patreon down below, where for as little as $3 a month, you can get early access to all of my reviews, as well as everything else going up on the channel. And at higher tiers, you can even pick the next character that I will cover. But if you can't afford to do that, please only donate if you can comfortably do so. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem content. Liking, subscribing, sharing, and even just watching the videos support me more than I can express, so I really appreciate it. Regardless of what you choose to do, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.